Arthur Vance was the billionaire who tried to buy his future. 10 perfect women, $20 million on the line, and a cruel clause that could strip him of everything. Yet, within that glass castle, there was one person who was never part of the blueprint. Julia Carter, the invisible assistant, ignored and humiliated by them all. What no one could have predicted was that she would be the one to touch what science, money, and power could never reach. Because some legacies are only forged by true love. The silence in the doctor's office was deafening. Arthur stared at the test results on the screen as if he could change them with sheer willpower. "In 6 months, your reproductive viability will be 0, Dr. Miller said, his voice low, almost too respectful. "It's a rare genetic condition, and it's irreversible." Arthur stood up without a word. He walked to his car, started the engine, but sat there, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The words of his late grandfather's will came back with chilling clarity. Without a legitimate heir by age 40, control of the Vance empire would pass to his cousin. He was 39. Back at the holding company's penthouse, he called his team together. "I want 10 women," he stated. "An IQ over 140, flawless genetics, and airtight contracts. 20 million to bear my children." Helen Davies, his lawyer, simply let out a slow breath. "What about the human element, Arthur?" He gazed out at the city skyline. "This is about survival." Julia Carter arrived early every day at the modest apartment building where she lived. Her first stop was always the public hospital, where she dropped off her brother Michael for another round of dialysis. She worked odd jobs as a maid in mid-range hotels, cleaned offices at night, and sold baked goods on Sundays. Since their mother passed away, a cleaning lady who never complained about life, even on the cruelest days, Julia had shouldered every burden, including the debts. That day, returning from yet another failed interview, she found a note taped to the front gate. "Live-in assistant position at a luxury residence. Above average salary, urgent." The envelope had a name: Helen Davies, lawyer, and a discreet phone number. Michael was coughing in his room when she entered. "The hospital called, sis. They're cutting the new medicine next month. It's too expensive." She held the paper on her lap, looking at her pale brother huddled under the thin sheets. "Maybe this is our chance." 2 days later, Julia went through a quick screening. The final interview was at the Vance estate itself, which was still undergoing renovations. In the grand hall, women in designer suits and high heels ignored the young woman in worn jeans and sneakers. She carried a plastic bottle of water in her purse and a rosary in her jacket pocket. When her turn came, she entered the room with her heart pounding in her throat. "Name?" Helen asked without looking up. "Julia Carter, 30 years old, high school graduate, experience as a maid and caregiver, and I really need this job." Helen looked up. She seemed weary, but firm. She saw something in Julia's eyes that wasn't on her resume. "You would have to live here. Family visits only on Sundays. Michael is my little brother. I'll do anything for him. I just need a chance." Minutes later, Helen stepped outside and spoke on the phone. "I found someone unexpected, but that's exactly why she's perfect. She'll go completely unnoticed." And that's how Julia entered that house. Unaware she would be despised by all. Unaware that in a mansion where she was a nobody, she would change everything. In the first week, Julia became a ghost. She was the one who made the rooms impeccable before the candidates woke up, who organized the snacks, adjusted the pool temperature, and wrote down every specific request: orthopedic pillows, organic strawberries, white flowers in the suites. She did everything in silence. No one even knew her name, but she knew all of theirs. Lauren, an internationally recognized lawyer; Brooke, a former model and cosmetics entrepreneur; Elise, an award-winning geneticist, and so on. Women shaped by success and aesthetics, intelligence, fertility, appearance, the chosen ones. Julia just wanted enough to pay for Michael's medication and get his name on a private transplant list. She dreamed of it every night, even when she collapsed exhausted without eating. On Wednesday, The mansion was hosting a formal dinner with investors, an elegant parade to show the world Arthur Vance's genetic selection. Helen handed Julia a special uniform, a discreet black dress, a beige apron, and a pulled-back hairstyle. "Professional without drawing attention," she said. Hours before the event, Julia was cleaning the main hall when Lauren approached. "I need French champagne on ice, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm getting it now." "Good girl," Brooke said, appearing behind her. "Just don't drop anything expensive tonight, okay?" Julia didn't reply. At dinner, all eyes were on the future mothers. Julia served discreetly, avoiding the guests' gazes until she approached the main table. Lauren, smiling, subtly extended her leg into Julia's path. The trip was unavoidable. The tray with glasses and dark sauce flew into the air and landed directly on Lauren's white dress. A piercing silence fell over the room. "Are you insane?" Lauren screamed, standing up. "This is pure Italian silk, you incompetent idiot." All the guests looked over. Julia, on her knees, picked up the broken glass from the floor. She said nothing. Her hands were trembling, her eyes burned, but she didn't blink. "Someone get this little maid out of here," Brooke said, laughing. "She's ruining the investment." That's when Arthur walked in. He looked at the scene, the glasses on the floor, the stained dress, Julia in silent resignation. "If you break anything in this house again, it will be deducted from your payment," he said coldly. The women froze. "Julia, clean this up, now." She stood up without looking at anyone. In the kitchen, as she washed the shards, her eyes finally gave way. But only a single tear fell, and she whispered to herself, "I have to endure this. For Michael." 2 weeks after the dinner, Julia had become the constant butt of jokes at the mansion. Brooke had nicknamed her uniform the Little Maid costume. Lauren let out discreet giggles whenever she passed. The others simply ignored her existence. Even so, Julia pressed on. She woke up before everyone else, cleaned quietly, and hid when she needed to cry. She knew the world didn't make space for people who came from where she did. But what she didn't know was that Arthur had been watching her. Without her noticing, he'd observed how she gently adjusted the orchids in the greenhouse, how she checked the room temperatures before bed, how she hid her back pain with a smile, just to avoid being a bother. That morning, Michael took a turn for the worse. Julia received a call from the hospital while she was organizing the silverware in the dining room. She requested an emergency leave. Helen hesitated, but allowed it. Julia rushed to the public hospital, where she found her brother with sunken eyes, a dry mouth, and the dialysis machine humming with a heavy rhythm. "The doctor said my kidney function is almost at 0, he said, his voice weak. "They're trying to move me up the list, but it'll take more tests and money." She held his hand. "I'm not going to let you go, Michael, I promise." The next day, she returned to the mansion exhausted. She didn't even notice a paper had been slipped under her door. As she prepared breakfast, Helen called her into a meeting. "The ladies reported the disappearance of a valuable Vance family heirloom," she said, her voice strained. "A ruby brooch, a gift from Arthur's grandmother. And it was found at the bottom of your drawer." The world stopped. "What? This is a mistake. Someone put that there." Lauren walked into the room, feigning shock. "It's always the same story, isn't it? Someone planted it. Just like your mother, right? She also worked for the Vance family and also left under a cloud of theft allegations." "My mother was exonerated," Julia retorted, trembling. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance herself wrote a letter of apology." "And you have that letter?" Brooke taunted, crossing her arms. "Or did it disappear just like the brooch?" Helen asked for silence. "We'll await Arthur's decision. But for now, you are suspended from your duties in the main house." Julia left the room, drained of all strength. Behind her, she heard muffled laughter, voices calling her a thief, a phony, a fraud. She went to her room, took off her apron, and for the first time in weeks, she broke down. She cried, as she hadn't since her mother's death. She cried for the weight of the injustice, for the pain of seeing history repeat itself. In the late afternoon, Arthur arrived. Helen called him in immediately. She showed him the photos, the brooch, the reports. "Do you think she's capable of this?" he asked. "I don't know," Helen replied. "But the evidence was planted cleverly. If it's a lie, it's a high-level setup." Arthur was silent. His eyes were fixed on the window. Minutes later, Julia was called to his office. She walked in with her back straight, but her face was pale. "You called for me?" Arthur didn't answer right away. He picked up the brooch from his desk. "Is it true your mother worked for my family?" "Yes, for 10 years, and she was accused of theft, unfairly. Mrs. Eleanor herself wrote a letter of apology. She admitted her mistake, but my mother was never the same after that. Do you have this letter? It's at my brother's apartment." "I can bring it. Why didn't you tell me before?" She took a deep breath. "Because I knew that if they found out, they'd think I had a plan, that I came here for revenge. I just wanted a job. I just wanted to save Michael." The silence between them lasted for a few seconds. "You can go, Julia," he said at last. She looked into his eyes. She searched for something, a certainty, a show of support, but all she saw was hesitation. That night, Julia packed her bags. She left her ID badge on the dresser, a note for Helen, and walked out the back door of the mansion in a light drizzle. She didn't call a cab. She took nothing but her backpack. She walked to the bus stop, and when she sat on the rusty bench, she let the pain flow along with the rain. She wasn't crying for the job. She was crying because she had believed that someone like her could be seen. Have you ever trusted someone and watched that trust crumble in silence? Have you ever felt that your story was judged before it was even heard? If this scene resonated with you in some way, reply with a yes in the comments. It's my way of knowing that you're here and that this story spoke to you too. 2 days after leaving the mansion, Julia returned to the small apartment she shared with her brother. Michael was better but still weak. When she came in, he tried to get up from the bed. "Sis, what happened? Why are you back so soon?" She smiled with effort. "I had an issue, but everything's fine now." While he slept, she rummaged through the drawer of their mother's old dresser. At the very bottom, among yellowed papers and old photos, she found what she was looking for: the letter. It was handwritten on official Vance family letterhead. Eleanor Vance, the matriarch, asked for forgiveness from Maria Carter, Julia's mother, for having unjustly accused her of theft after finding the jewels hidden in an old box that she herself had misplaced. "My memory failed me, but my conscience will not forgive me. May this letter, though long overdue, clear your name, Maria." Julia read the words 3 times, as if they were a balm on an old wound. She cried in silence, but unlike the other times, it wasn't from pain. It was something cleaner, more whole. She put the letter in a plastic folder, took a deep breath, and looked at Michael sleeping on the sofa. "I'm not running away, brother. Not anymore." The next morning, she put on the same simple outfit she had worn for her first interview. She tied up her hair, grabbed the letter, and walked out. There was no resentment in her eyes, only resolve. She wasn't returning to the mansion to beg for a job. She was returning to show them who she was and who her mother had always been. Whether she would be heard, she didn't know, but for the first time, it didn't matter. Because in that moment, Julia knew her story was worth more than any accusation, and that sometimes dignity is the only thing that can't be taken away or bought. Julia arrived at the mansion's gate in the early afternoon. She asked to speak to Helen, the lawyer. She was met with surprise and suspicion, but she didn't flinch. She handed over the folder with the letter. "Please read this. It's all I have." Helen read every line carefully. When she finished, she looked up. "This changes a lot of things." Minutes later, Julia was discreetly escorted to Arthur's office. He was standing, looking out at the city through the window. When he turned and saw her, he froze. "You came back, not out of regret. I came back because I have proof, and because my mother deserves this." She held out the letter. He read it in silence. It was, in fact, his grandmother's handwriting. The tone was solemn, heavy with guilt. The confession was clear. Why didn't you show me this before? Because I knew that deep down you wouldn't trust me, and I no longer trusted you either. He lowered his gaze, ashamed. I'm sorry, Julia. Me too, but not for me. For you, for having so much and still living in fear of losing everything. She turned to leave, but he called out to her, Stay, please. She hesitated. Helen is going to gather everyone in the main living room. This story will be clarified now, in front of all of them, and so it was. Before all the women, Arthur read the letter aloud. The silence was absolute. This is the truth, and anyone who participated in an attempt to frame her is officially out of the project. Brooke tried to protest. Lauren feigned innocence, but neither of them had the courage to argue. Julia remained standing on the other side of the room, silent. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate, because in that moment, the real victory wasn't being exonerated. It was knowing that her voice had finally been heard. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. His grandmother's letter remained on his office desk, next to an old photograph. Eleanor Vance shaking hands with the president during the inauguration of the family's first factory. He stared at the two papers as if trying to decipher who he really was, the heir to a dynasty or the man who was about to lose it. Hours earlier, Helen had brought up an uncomfortable reminder. The will's clause remains valid. Without a biological heir under your custody by age 40, the entire empire goes to Kyle. Kyle, the opportunistic cousin who had been waiting for a stumble for years. And there's more, she continued. Clause 42B of the surrogacy contracts prohibits any emotional or marital involvement with third parties until the children turn 5 years old. What if Arthur hesitated. What if I get involved with Julia? Helen slowly took off her glasses. You lose custody of the children, and you'll have to pay the full value of the contracts to the mothers. We're talking about almost $500 million. He said nothing. He just leaned back in his leather armchair, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. When she left, he was alone with the only question he had never been able to answer. What is worth more, the legacy you were given, or the one you decide to build with your own hand? The next day, he found Julia in the orchid greenhouse, just as in the silent nights they had shared before everything fell apart. She was watering the flowers gently, but her eyes were distant. Helen told me about the clauses, she said without turning around. If you get close to me, you lose everything. Arthur approached slowly. What if everything I thought I wanted doesn't make sense anymore? Julia let out a soft sigh. Don't complicate things, Arthur. I'm not complicating things. For the first time, I'm finally understanding. She looked at him for a moment. There was fear in her eyes, but there was also something new, a spark. What if you fail again? He smiled, tired. Maybe I'll finally learn what it means to be human. The storm began in the late afternoon. Strong winds shook the cypress trees in the garden. Lightning streaked across the New York City sky with a fury that seemed to reflect something internal, something that had been silently building for days. At the Vance estate, the generators were already on. The power had gone out in part of the property, and security guards made extra rounds to ensure everything remained stable. Julia went to the greenhouse to check on the orchids, as she always did on nights of heavy rain. It was the only place where she could take a deep breath, where she remembered her mother, where she felt real. She was there, arranging the pots when she heard the door open. She didn't turn around. I knew I'd find you here, Arthur said in a low voice. She let out a weary smile. This greenhouse is my escape, and my confession. She turned, surprised. Confession. He approached slowly, as if each step defied the world around them. I can't stop thinking about you, Julia, even knowing what it could cost. She looked away. You can't say that, not now. You have children on the way, an empire to save. I have contracts, Julia, not children. Not really. Don't say that. Those children are blameless. I know, and they will never lack for anything, but that's not what I'm talking about. Another peal of thunder, stronger. I'm talking about me, he continued. For the first time, I feel off script, off plan, and maybe that's exactly what I need. She was holding a watering can as if it were a shield. "If you choose me, you'll lose everything." "Not everything," he said, taking one more step closer. "I'd still have you." She smiled, a sad smile. "That's what you think now, but one day you'll blame me. You'll look at me and see what you lost." He held out his hand, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "Or I'll look at you and remember what I finally found." For a moment, everything stopped. The rain beat against the glass with force. The generator lights flickered, and then she let go of the watering can. A small but definitive gesture. Their bodies met in the middle of the greenhouse. The kiss was restrained and intense, the kind of kiss that carries pain, fear, and truth, so much more than desire. When they pulled apart, Arthur rested his forehead against hers. "I'm breaking all my rules." "Me too," she whispered. Outside, hidden under the side veranda, Lauren held her phone. She was recording everything. The press of the button was subtle. The automatic send. In seconds, half of the Heirs Project would know. Arthur Vance was involved with the one woman who wasn't part of the plan. And that changed everything. 3 months went by. It was late afternoon in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the city's north side. The sun filtered through the trees as children played on the sidewalk, chasing a half-deflated ball. In a small coffee shop on the corner, Julia served 2 perfect cappuccinos. The cafe was modest but charming. She was now the manager. She was taking night classes. Michael was continuing his treatment with guaranteed medication. And finally, on the priority list for a transplant. She seemed at peace, not rich, not famous, but whole. On the shelf behind the counter, among the books she offered customers to read, was the letter from Arthur's grandmother, framed without a caption, just there, as a silent reminder. The truth has value. The bell on the door chimed. She turned. It was Arthur. Not in a suit, not with an escort, not as the Vance. Just him, in a light-colored shirt with a shy look in his eyes. In his hands, a small orchid in a white pot. "I thought it might go with your new place." She laughed, taking the pot carefully. "Orchids still remind me of complicated nights and silent victories," he finished. They sat at a corner table. Both seemed comfortable in the silence. "How are the women?" she asked, breaking the ice. "They received everything they were promised. The children will be well taken care of. And I gave up the total control clause. I handed part of the empire over to the board." She looked at him, surprised. "You actually did that?" "I needed to stop protecting what my grandfather built and start building something of my own." She looked out the window. "And do you know what you want to build now?" He held her hand across the table gently. "Not everything yet, but I know who I want to try with." She smiled. A small smile, but a genuine one. Outside, the day slowly grew dark. The world continued to rush by, but inside, for a moment, everything was exactly where it needed to be. She didn't conquer the world, but she conquered what was inside her. Julia learned that dignity is not something you ask for. It's something you carry, even when the world tries to strip it away. She grew up hearing that she had to be twice as good to be noticed half as much. And for a long time she believed that silence was survival. But in that mansion, in the face of the worst versions of power and prejudice, she understood that sometimes the only way to change the game is to refuse to play. Arthur, on the other hand, discovered that his empire didn't crumble because of love. It crumbled when he confused control with security, and that the true legacy wasn't keeping the Vance name at the top. It was ensuring that Julia's name was never forgotten again. Together, they understood that some love stories don't begin with promises, they begin with resistance, and that you don't need to inherit anything to leave your mark. You just need the courage to be who you are when no one else believes. Now I ask you, how many times have you stayed silent just to fit into a space that was never truly yours? How many times have they doubted you just because they couldn't see where you came from? If this story moved you, maybe it's because, in some way, it's also yours. If this story resonated with you in some way, if it gave you a lump in your throat at any point, please like this video now. It shows me that it's worth continuing to write stories like this. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I read every single one with care, and whenever I can, I reply to each one. If you believe in the power of stories that truly touch the heart, subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started, and you are a part of it. Don't go just yet. Choose one of the stories I've put on the screen for you to watch next. I'll see you in the next video.